Hello and welcome back, and today we want to talk about two 6-bay Synologies released like a month apart. Today we're going to be looking at the brand new DS1621 Plus and how it compares against the DS1621 XS Plus, released barely a month apart from one another. Both of these are 2020 NAS systems, part of their 2020-2021 portfolio from Synology, both Diskstations, and they're both using the very familiar 6-bay chassis of the Diskstation series. In fact, these are probably only about the third or fourth 6-bay that Synology have ever released. They brought 6-bays to the market back in mid-2018 because a lot of people like to take advantage of RAID 6. RAID 6 being a 2-disk parity level, with hard drives reaching capacities these days of frankly astounding proportions. I mean, we're talking about 18 TB and 20 TB drives right now. The result is that between these two systems, a 6-bay fully populated in a RAID 6 still gives you 4 bays of frankly enormous storage. And today I want to help you guys decide whether you should be buying the 1621 Plus or the XS version of it. But a quick disclaimer straight off the bat. You've probably picked up already all manner of background noise behind me. I can't do anything about it. There is building work happening right here connected to me. And try as I might, I'm trying to limit as much sound as possible, leaking through and playing with the edit, but there's just not a huge amount I can do. So I apologise if throughout the course of this video you can hear those guys outside going at it hammer and tongs against that wall. So I will try my hardest. But regarding these two NAS devices, they are incredibly similar. So similar, in fact, that in the intro to this video, even while talking to you, I thought they were the other way around. They both use exactly the same 6-bay chassis. They've both got metal chassis. They've both got 250 watt PSUs. They both support the same SATA drive sizes. They've both got M2 NVMe cache bays inside. They've both featuring 1 GBE, although there's a little surprise extra on the XS, and they've both got PCIe upgradability as well. They're very, very similar boxes, even on a software level, with both of them arriving with a great amount of support from Diskstation Manager, or DSM, currently in 6.2 at the time of this recording, with 7 on the way at the end of the year. They both arrive with access to the collaboration suite of apps: Synology Chat, replacing WhatsApp and Skype; Synology Office, to replace Microsoft Office 365 and Google Docs. They've got Synology Drive, that great one-portal synchronization and backup tool that lets you pin and stream file data in the same way you can with OneDrive and Office 365, as well as a UI and a multi-drive data opening system, much as you would find in Google Drive or Dropbox. What I'm saying is these two are very similar, and that goes even further into Surveillance Station, both supporting a huge number of cameras with 2 licenses on day one. Both of them arrive with support of virtual machine use, with multiple VMs being utilised and deployed thanks to Synology's Virtual Machine Manager. They both arrive with that great Synology CMS multi-system overview, as well as Active Backup Suite, which is that enterprise grade, very, very advanced backup and overseeing synchronization tool that allows you to back up VM environments with Hyper-V and VMware. It allows you to back up physical installations on PC and desktop and mobile applications clients. All of these systems and applications from Synology and DSM run really, really well on these devices. And with both of them being 6-bays, and both of them arriving with the same support of drives, and both of them being expandable up to a total of 16 hard drives in a total array, thanks to connecting 2 DX517 expansion chassis over eSATA, they are incredibly similar. But you didn't come here to find out what was the same about them. You came here to know what was different, because let's face it, with a price difference of nearly 100% between them, it's mental. The 1621 Plus arrives at about £800 to £850, including the VAT, but not for the hard drives or SSD media. The DS1621 XS Plus is about £1,500, about 15, maybe to £1,500 there. There is an enormous disparity between them for two devices that seemingly on the face of it give you the same thing. Right, so let's find out how they justify that price difference. Because let's face it, if this is going to cost more, unsurprisingly, it is the better of the two. When it comes to having either one of these, this gets more done, it has more resources to do it, and therefore it can get more done overall in the short and the long term. It also arrives with a greater degree of support in a number of ways, and its internal and in many cases external architecture make it superior as well. But is it enough different? So first thing is that CPU. Now, it's already flashed on screen, I'm sure, but the pair of them arrived with very, very different CPUs. Time was that the architecture between the XS and the Plus series was pretty much the same over the years, and things have mixed up quite a great deal. Now, the XS arrives with a Xeon-based processor inside there. It's the same Xeon that we've talked about before, and it's a quad-core 2.2 GHz Xeon-based processor. And though it doesn't have embedded graphics, it can be burst up to 2.7 GHz per core, and that is an x86 64-bit processor inside there with support of DDR4 memory and 8 GB by default, and that's DDR4 error code correction memory, or ECC, built into it as well, that can be upgraded over 2 slots up to 32 GB of memory, which is going to be music to the ears of surveillance and VM users indeed. Now, I've already mentioned the M2 NVMe slots inside, both of which are PCIe Gen 3x4, but ultimately means that you can utilize lovely SSDs inside this device and leverage the high performance, high IOPS and low latency of those SSDs, those two, against the 6 hard drives inside, which are arguably going to be lower priced and larger capacity, but always slower due to their mechanical nature. And that great caching system that Synology have brought to the table, which is even more evolved than ever in DSM 6.2 and 7 on the way, and in the likes of Synology Drive and general access use, in conjunction with that DDR4 ECC memory and that CPU, make the 1621 quite a powerhouse of a machine. However, that CPU has been around the Synology devices for quite a while. It's not the newest Xeon out there by any regard. It's still a very, very good CPU, but it is not one of the newest. Now, in the case of the DS1621 Plus, however, the CPU inside is newer, but nowhere near as powerful in the grand scheme of things. It is the Ryzen V1500B. It is a quad-core CPU, just like the other one. It's a 2.2 GHz CPU, just like the other one, and it's non-GPU embedded, just like the other one. It doesn't have the turbo built in, but it does have a Ryzen embedded architecture. So, although it's not comparable classically against Ryzen 3, 5 or 7, it's still a server grade equivalent that's designed to be on 24/7, unlike those other CPUs. This is designed to be an efficient CPU, a CPU that's designed to use a lesser amount of power to get the jobs done compared to those higher end Ryzens. Again, not as powerful as the Xeon, and doesn't rate as highly on CPU benchmark. In fact, if you look at CPU benchmark, that Xeon rates quite high, but not perfectly high, and in fact neither one of them has a direct listing on CPU benchmark, only comparable results, which again still put it with the Xeon in favour. It does arrive with DDR4 ECC memory, which can be upgraded to 32 just like the other one, but it only arrives with 4 GB by default, so that's half the memory and a CPU that isn't quite as punchy. That said, you can upgrade the CPU, the memory on this device quite easily with lots of official upgrades out there. They're not the cheapest though, with a 4 GB memory module retailing for about 80 quid knocking around, and that's quite a large chunk of change for just 4 GB of memory. Now, apart from that, between these two CPUs, there isn't a huge amount of difference with regard to their internal hardware. They both use very similar internal controllers, but the real next big difference between them comes down to the rear of the devices. Now, if we turn them around, you can see probably immediately one of the biggest differences between them, which I'm sure a number of you already know about prior to watching this video, and it's to do with these connections here. They've both got USB 3 ports that can be utilized for UPSs, can be used for external storage, can be used for USB backups, can be used by a few kind of office devices like scanners and printers and stuff like that. I've even done some experimentation with that great driver that BBQQ over on GitHub has been putting together for users to take advantage of 5GBE adapters on these devices, and there's a video incoming for that one. But it has to be said that the big difference are these connections. On the 1621, you have got 4 1GBE ports. That means each one of those in 1 gigabit Ethernet architecture can give you around 100 megabytes. I think capping out at 108, 109 in some cases. They can be link aggregated to give you 4 to around 440 megabytes per second on a perfect environment, although it is worth highlighting that you, at 6 drives, you really are hitting the saturation point in a number of ways, especially in a RAID 6. Now, linking those together to get that 4GBE is something that you can only take advantage of with a managed switch. That is a switch that allows you to bond ports together and take advantage of link aggregation or something known as port trunking. There are alternatives in the form of load balancing, which allows lanes to be used kind of concurrently, but it's not quite the same and you won't get those big speeds. It's more about sharing and partitioning jobs one after the other. Now in the 1621 XS, we still have 2 1GBE ports, so again, 200 megabytes per second there, good for you. But then you've got a 10 gigabit Ethernet port, and this is where it's at, because that gives you 1,000 megabytes per second inside there. 10 GBE is something that Synology up until recently has really kept at arm's length and has only now started rolling it into a few other devices. It's still only in the XS, and I still think it'll be a long time before the likes of a standard Plus series will get 10 GBE, but a Xeon powered 10 GBE NAS that has M2 NVMe cache inside is definitely something to write home about. Now again, this is a 6-bay NAS, and you're just at the tipping point there where 10 GBE is at its maximum. If you fully populate this with SSDs, slightly different story. You're going to get in excess of 1,000 quite easily. But even with enterprise grade 7200 RPM drives with 256 megabytes of cache, if you did put 6 drives inside here, RAID 5, RAID 6 environment, you're just going to exceed 1,000 megs. So the 10 GBE on here is just enough. Now, you could take advantage of the PCIe slot here and introduce a 2-port card. This will support that. But then you are going to have to move away from traditional hard drives because you're just not going to fill and saturate 2 lines of 10 GBE on this. 1 port is just enough, to be perfectly frank on this. Now, is the 10 GBE port justifying a lot of that price difference? And I would argue no, because Synology have their own range, and the backplane I've already removed for another video, but Synology have their own range of 10 GBE cards, 1 and 2 port out there. Now this card retails, I think, for about 120, 130 quid if you shop around. It is quite a decent little PCIe upgrade as well. It doesn't utilise any of the lesser grade that might bottleneck the card. I think it might be PCIe Gen 3 on that card. Double check that. But again, I tested it before. It does have a PCIe that is more than enough to completely fill that 10 GBE port there. Now that means that this system, with another 120 quid, let's be fair, you can add 10 GBE. With another spend of around 80 quid, you've got another 4 gig of memory on there. So at the moment, you've spent about 200 quid more here to get it to have 10 GBE and that 8 gig of memory that this has as well. So at the moment, you're sitting at around £1,000, £1,050 for this. So there's still £500, give or take, difference between them. Where is that other £500? Well, I'd say it's shared across 2 things. One, it would be that CPU, which is still a Xeon, which is still a great business CPU, with each one of those cores able to support a VM comfortably, where I would be less inclined to believe though each core of that Ryzen could support a VM and still leave 1 core on each for the system operating, the DSM, if you leave it behind. Another area of difference between them is the warranty, with the 1621 Plus arriving with 3 years of manufacturer's warranty, whereas the XS Plus here has 5 years of warranty. Now, you can get an extendable memory of another 2 years on this with the EW202 or 201, one of those two. I do apologise for it now off the top of my head, but that will still cost you a little bit of money, and I do think that is where the price difference between these two devices lies. It is that CPU and that the warranty difference. Nearly anything you buy in any tech industry that has a longer warranty will always affect the price. It's just one of those things that happens, and these two are no exception. Apart from that, the build quality is near enough identical between them, both in terms of physicality, the amount of noise generated, the 250 watt PSUs, and that PCIe upgrade slot. But that does open the door to a couple of things that are worth discussing. Now, neither one of these two systems are suitable for the E10M20 upgrade card. Both of them will allow you to install that card. However, you'll only be able to take advantage of that one 10GBE slot on the top. Because even though it has the two NVMe bays inside this card, both of these two already arrive with NVMe SSD bays inside. The system doesn't allow you to take advantage of those extra slots. You can't use them for raw storage. You can't use them for additional caching. They're not visible. The result being that these two systems, that PCIe slot is pretty much dedicated to upgrading your network interface, and that means Synology's own two-port cards, taking advantage of Intel or Mellanox dual-port cards. These systems are designed with that PCIe slot to add two more slots. One if you're lucky, but be realistic, two. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, you're not really going to be able to saturate either one of these two devices beyond about 12, maybe 1300 megs in a 6-bay in a RAID 5 or RAID 6. So even then, that card is largely superfluous. So what you're really asking here is, this system, you're going to use that slot for either a 1-port or a 2-port 10GBE card. So what are you going to do to this? Because if you add a 2-port card to this system that's already got one 10GBE, you're not going to use it. You're not going to need 30 GBE link aggregated or separate connected to this device. You're just not. Maybe as a failover, but that's about it. And even then, you're still going to get away with 20. Now, whether that factors into your buying decision or the idea that you want to upgrade on day one, have that upgrade available on day one, or schedule it out down the line when your budget allows, that's a different conversation. But I will highlight one last very important difference between these two devices that never ceases to amaze me every time I have to say it in a video, and that is SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID. The XS does not have it. This has support of JBOD, just a bunch of drives, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, RAID 6, RAID 10, and RAID 50 and RAID 60, and then the weird RAIDs. This has support of all of those, plus Synology Hybrid RAID. Now, for those that aren't already aware, Synology Hybrid RAID, or SHR, is the ability to introduce multiple drives inside, and you can mix the drives. Normal RAID configurations, such as RAID 5 and RAID 6, as mentioned, only allow you to use the same drive capacity. So if you filled this device with 10 TB drives, so you've got 60 TB there, in a RAID 5 or RAID 6, you'd have either 50 or 40 terabytes of space. Now, if you tried a few years down the line to introduce larger drives, say 20 or 30 TB, God forbid, down the line, if you try to introduce those drives years from now to replace the other ones that are in there as they start filling up, the system will only see those drives as the smallest available drive, i.e. 10 TB. And you will end up having to replace the entire system with larger drives and offset the data elsewhere and bring it back. Whereas on an SHR enabled NAS, you can introduce larger drives, and after you've introduced one, because the first one will still count as the largest parity drive, but after that, if you introduce those larger drives like the 20 TB we mentioned, the SHR can absorb all the extra storage and will give you the storage benefits. It won't just class every new introduced drive as the smallest available drive in the array. And SHR has been, frankly, one of the most popular features for Synology buyers out there. When I talk about these things year on year, it's what people want the most. It was one of the biggest complaints for the reviews and the comparisons that we had about the XS, Plus, it's a great NAS, but the lack of SHR just annoys people. In fact, so much so that I've reached out to Synology several times on this, and their response has always been the same. SHR, as great and as fluid and as flexible as it is, doesn't give you the same top tier performance as traditional RAID. It's just shy of it, 5 to 10% here or there, whether it's a RAID 5 and a RAID 6 versus an SHR and an SHR2, a 1 and 2 disk parity. But as good as SHR is for flexibility, most people that buy enterprise level solutions install all the drives on day one. People that go for the Plus series and the lower tiers in the 2 and the 4 bays, they generally, well, if not half populate, then they gradually populate. Whereas enterprise users will fill the drives on day one and replace all the drives on rotation every few years, whether it's for reasons of durability, which are more applicable to SSDs, or simply because they've run out of warranty, and as they're covered for the 3 or 5 year warranty as Pro and standard drives can be, they then replace them out with a new series of drives each time. And in that scenario, SHR has no real intrinsic value, and then the more important variable is performance, and that's where XS lives. But choosing between these two is not easy, because there's a huge price difference between them, and the money you save going for the 1621 could go towards some serious terabytes. It can go towards some serious upgrades of memory, of network interface cards, can go into those NVMe SSDs. There's lots of ways in which that budget can still be spread into this device in the long term. But do know that this, at its best, with all the bells and whistles and all the cylinders flying, will still not quite hit the performance of this. More so in third-party environments, but also within Synology's own DSM, with both of them providing great performance. But this is still going to win the race. This isn't a tortoise and a hare. This is going to win regardless. This, on its day, is still not as good as this day to day. And that should be the big takeaway. Performance versus flexibility. That's the big takeaway. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Do let me know if you have, because it does help me understand what you guys like on this channel. Click subscribe if you want to learn more, and visit the links in the description to NAS Compares for the full guides and comparisons on either one of these NASs, and of course the links to span.com, 25 years in the biz, the NAS experts, to get hold of your NAS today. I will see you next time.